Hey class, in this video we are going to be going over some of the basics of Adobe Animate and creating an animated GIF which we will post on the Open Lab for our first animation assignment. So there's a lot to cover here since we haven't used this software before. One of the nice things since we're using all these Adobe programs is you are going to start to see kind of these similarities between the programs, which is not just for Adobe, but there is obviously, because they're all made by the same company, they share some similar qualities. The nice thing about doing animation after doing image and then audio is that we're kind of combining a couple things that we've already looked at. So obviously with images, we were looking at creating visual, images. With animation, we're going to be doing that, but we're also going to be using the timeline, which we did a little bit when we were editing audio. So we're kind of combining both of those processes together. So let's get into it. I'm going to just go over to Adobe Animate. Obviously, you need to download the program and open it up. If you have any issues with that, let me know. We can go over it. It's still very loud around my apartment, so I'm sorry if there's a lot of background noise, but we are just going to keep working with it. And so here's our little rundown. We've got a lot to cover. So let's get into it. I'm going to go over to Animate. When you first open Animate, you're going to see a couple different windows with some tutorials and suggestions for how to get started. Obviously, if you want to go through those, feel free. They're going to be very informative. I'm going to go over some of the basics, so there's going to be a little bit of overlap there, but of course they won't be exactly the same. So once we get into Animate, once you get into this screen, so if you get rid of the tutorials, you'll be able to create a new file or start a new file from one of these templates. I usually go over to new file here, and then this opens a window that also has a bunch of templates. And for our animated GIF, I want to do something that's square. Animated GIFs don't have to be square, but they tend to be square. So I can just, put in the dimensions that I want, or you can kind of go through and look through, like social media, is going to be more likely to have square options. And it does. The first option is square. Profile photo. So I'm just going to go with this first square option. I guess it's a Facebook preset, but that doesn't really matter. It's 600 by 600, and I'm going to change the frame rate to 24. 24 frames per second is kind of the standard for a lot of animation. In the intro animation video, we kind of talked about the illusion of motion. And the frame rate really kind of determines how well the illusion of motion works. So the frame rate is how many images per second we're going to see. And the more images per second you have, obviously the more sort of resolution or the more smooth the motion will be. And we start to see, if you only have one image per second, you can kind of very obviously see the change of images. And maybe we'll do a little demo of that when we get in there. And as you get faster, you get more smooth motion. And so around like 12 to 15 is where we start to see mostly motion and not see the individual frames. 24 is kind of the default. Most film is like around 30 frames per second. Video games are like 60 frames per second because there's a lot of interaction happening, so we need smoother motion. But anyway, we're going to set this to 24, and we're going to create. And you can change these later if you want to. So once I create a new document, if you look in the toolbar on the right here and go to the doc section, which stands for document, you can see the width setting here, the height setting here, the frames per second here, and there's also a stage, which you can change the background color of your stage or your canvas. So you can always change those, if you need to. Let's talk about the interface for a moment. This is kind of the default interface. I usually just stick with that. I don't really change much about the interface when I'm using Animate. It's pretty straightforward, but just like in Photoshop and Audition, if you go to the window section, you can see there's some windows that we don't see, so you might want to use some of these windows. You can bring them up. And there are also some default workspaces. So depending on what you're working on, you might want different workspaces. If I go to Basic, it brings up some other stuff. If I go to Classic, it puts the timeline on the top. But I'm very comfortable with just the essentials. So that's where I'm going to stick, and that's kind of the default. just like in our other programs, if you want, you can move these windows, you can pop them out and move them around. We probably won't need to do that, but you can if you want to reconfigure things. So just looking at our interface, we obviously have our stage in the middle. This is where we kind of do our drawing and do our animating. If you're an animation major, eventually you're going to use this program with like a big, nice, fancy tablet where you'll be able to use a pen and do drawings. For this class, I'm not going to assume that anybody has that, so we're just going to work with basic shapes and just use the mouse. It is definitely helpful to have an external mouse, like one of these little guys, but you could do it with your trackpad too if necessary. So in our stage, one thing that you might want to be able to do is zoom in and out. There's a zoom toggle here where you can fit to window, you can show the frame, you can show all of the content, you can make it smaller, you can make it much larger, so you can zoom in and out either to be able to see stuff or work on details. You can also hit Command on the Mac and hit the minus and plus button to zoom in and out, just like Photoshop. Or if you want to fit everything into the window, you hit Command 2 and that will fit. And obviously for Windows, there's no command, you use Control instead. Our timeline is where we do a lot of the animating, and we'll get into that. We'll spend a lot of time down there. But we have layers over here, just like we have in Photoshop. We have a playhead here, just like we have in Adobe Audition. Although it won't let me move it because there's no frame, so I always forget about that. You have some controls here, which we'll go over, and that's the basic timeline we'll spend a lot of work in. Our toolbar is over here, just like Photoshop. We have the selection tool, we have brushes, shape tools, pen, text, we have all this stuff here. And then over on the right, we have our properties. So we can change the colors, we can change the frame, we can do all this stuff. We haven't made anything yet, so none of this stuff is really like on, but we'll start making stuff now. A lot of what we're going to be going over in this video is keyframing, and that's sort of the basic idea behind how Adobe Animate works. And there's a few different ways of talking about this. The type of animation that we're going to be doing today is called frame by frame animation. And what that basically means is we're designing each frame. We're not using the computer to automate anything. And next week, we'll go into tweening, which is using the computer to automate some of our animation. But let's look at a couple of the tools, and we'll talk about a couple of things that are particular to Animate while we do that. Let's save our file before we do that. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to want to put this in my project, in my class folder, and then I'm going to make a new folder for animation. So I'll just create that. And for this, I want to call this animated GIF.fla. And FLA is our edit file, like our PSD or our Audition session file. So I'm going to click Save. And if you're working with like a stylus or with a drawing pad, you're going to want to probably use the brushes. The fluid brush tool is kind of the new brush tool that has lots of different parameters and settings you could tweak. The classic brush tool is a little bit simpler. It just has a couple options, and that's what I tend to use because that's what I'm used to. But we're not going to be working with those today. We're going to be working mainly with the mouse. So if I want to get rid of these things, one thing that I can do is just click on this and hit escape, and then click on this guy and hit escape. And so Animate, when we're creating content, it works a little bit different than Photoshop. There are layers, but the layers don't determine as much as they do in Photoshop. In Animate, when we add shapes and content to the screen, Animate kind of just assumes this sort of like flat layer, and things that overlap each other kind of become part of the same thing. So I'll give you an example of that. I'm going to take the brush. I'm going to make a, let's use this brush. I'm going to make a big brush stroke. I'm just going to draw a lot of stuff, and then I'm going to change the color here to something else. This is just a random color, and I'm going to draw across like that. And so now in Photoshop, you would still have these two things, even though they're on the same layer, you could pull them apart. But in Animate, we can't. So watch what happens when I click on this orange section. I've like sliced through this orange section with my other color. If I want to have those two things separate, I can make a layer, and then that won't happen. So let me demonstrate that real quick. I'll just add a new layer. I'll go back to my brush tool and I'll do that again. And now when I go to my selection, I can move the whole orange thing. So if you want to have like these separate things, you can make new layers. But typically we have when you're drawing, you can draw everything on one layer, and so everything becomes part of the same sort of mesh of color or shape or whatever it is you're making. So that's just one thing to look out for. Yeah, we had beyond that, you can use the selection tool to kind of move stuff around, and you can use the transform tool to rotate or scale. So I can scale this or move it or rotate it around. And so those two tools, the move tool and the transform or selection tool and the transform tool, we'll use those a lot as we kind of work. I'm going to delete my extra layer. I'm just going to keep things simple, and I'm going to delete this guy, and I'm going to hit Command 2 to focus again. And so let's create some content, and then we'll do some frame by frame animation. So let me just double check. So we're going to go over shape tools now. I kind of talked about this a little bit. We got to talk about this as well. Okay, so let's talk about colors before we get into keyframes. So I'm going to grab my shape tool, and if I make a little rectangle, you can see the color over here. It's also down here. And once I make a rectangle, it's just going to have that color. So I can change the color, but notice there's no stroke here. It's a little bit different than Photoshop. So if I make another rectangle, but this time let's make a stroke, and I'm going to make it kind of, why isn't it? Okay. I'm going to make it kind of wide. So I'm going to change the stroke size. And now when I make a rectangle, you can see there's two parts. But in Photoshop, those things would still be kind of like put together. But once I put that down there, if I take my select tool, when I select this, I'm basically just selecting a fill. And here I'm just selecting a stroke. And so once I kind of make these things, they're not really connected to each other anymore. I can kind of edit them separately. And you'll notice when I like cover something up, it just kind of like cuts through it. So it's a very particular way of working that's specific to Animate that's a little bit different than some of the other programs. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun to play around with, but you just have to be careful because you'll very quickly kind of like mess things up if you're not clear on what you're doing. So let's just make a selection. So I'm just going to draw a box over this stuff and just hit delete to get rid of it. And then let's do a box again. So I'm going to turn the stroke off this time. And let's make a little box over here. I'm going to make it off the screen. I'm going to hold shift so that it's a square, so same width and height. And this is what we're going to animate. And it's kind of green. That's fine. The color is not that important right now. I can change the color. So even though once I click on this, the stroke option goes away, I can still change the color. So if I wanted a red box, I can make a red box. If I wanted a purple box, I can make a purple box. You can change that. Okay, so let's finally do some animation. So I'm going to just animate the box across the screen. I'm going to make it very simple. And so when we're animating, we're going to be working with these little boxes down here called keyframes. And the keyframes are very sort of challenging and kind of picky when you start working with them. So you may get frustrated. Trust me, you will sort of get used to it once you've used it a bunch. But at first, it can be very annoying. And even I don't use Animate every day. I use another animation program called Blender for my own like work. But whenever I go back into Animate, I kind of have to tell myself, oh, there's this very specific workflow. It's very effective when you're using it and you're used to it. When you're first getting into it or getting back into it, as I often am, it's a little idiosyncratic. So you have to be patient. Okay, so let's get started with that. One of the things that we're going to want to do before we even start to add keyframes is, actually, let's add some keyframes and then we'll talk about keyboard commands. Okay, so this little box down here is our keyframe. Let me see if I can make that bigger. I can make it taller. That's not as helpful. Okay. There's a few different settings. Making it tall doesn't really help me a whole lot. I guess I can, okay, this is what I want to do. So if I drag on this little slider here, this kind of makes it bigger. I just want it to be easy to see for now since we're just getting started. And maybe I'll make this section a little bigger. Okay, let's rename our layer. I'm just going to double click on this and call this square so I know what I'm looking at. And so this box right here is a keyframe. The little black dot represents that it's a keyframe. A keyframe is essentially a frame that has some new type of information in it. And so this box here has no information in it. It's just blank. If I want to extend this part of my animation, I can click on this drop down and hold it and create a new frame. And so now I have two frames that are the same. So that's the difference between a keyframe and a frame. So every time I hit that frame button here, it's going to add a new frame. But each one of these frames is the same thing. It's just that square. What a keyframe is when I change something in that frame. And so something that you have to be very careful about is if I just move this box, it's going to move it. I'm still editing whatever this original dot is. If I want to move the box and create a new frame of animation, what I need to do first is create a keyframe. So I'm going to click on this now, and I'm going to click keyframe. So now I have two keyframes. I have this dot, and I have this dot. And if I make changes to this dot, if I move it over here, now I'm starting to create an animation. And that's basically what you do over and over and over again. So I would create a new keyframe, and I would move it over a little bit more, and create a new keyframe, and move it over, and create a new keyframe, and move it over. And you can start to see this is quite tedious, as we discussed, even if we're not using pen and paper. Making this little short animation, I had to press a bunch of buttons and do a lot of stuff. Okay, so let's get rid of some of these frames. So if I want to get rid of a frame, I can click on the frame, right click, and say remove frames. Okay, and there's a way to do that more efficiently, but for now we're just going to do that. Okay, so now I've got my frames, my keyframes, and if I hit enter, we get to preview this little animation. Okay, so I could keep clicking the button and moving to get the square all the way across the screen. That's fine. If you're a mouse person, if you're more of a visual person, and you're happy to just click and move, just do it that way. It'll take a little bit longer, but it's perfectly fine. If you're like me and you want to do things a little bit faster, and this is really how people will do things in the industry, what we need to start using is key commands or keyboard shortcuts. If you're on Windows, you can use the F keys for this. On my Mac keyboard, the F keys are remapped to like Mac stuff. And you can change that, but we're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is reassign the keyboard shortcuts. So this part is going to be a little confusing. You can skip over this if you want to just click and use your mouse. But if you want to move a little faster, we're going to set up some keyboard shortcuts. If you're on your Windows, you can just use the F keys for this. So to change the keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to go to Animate and go to Keyboard Shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts are kind of like an important thing in software and media anyway, so it's a good thing to just be familiar with. So in my keyboard shortcuts, there's this whole big list of different shortcuts, and if I drop them down, you can assign shortcuts, you can change them, you can use the defaults, whatever. Right now, there's this sort of default. I'm going to actually reset the defaults, because I've only made a couple changes to accommodate using the Mac. So you can search for key commands or keyboard shortcuts two ways. One is by the thing that you're looking for. So if I want to change the keyframe key commands, I can say keyframe, and then it'll show me all the key commands related to keyframes. And the thing that I'm doing, another thing is that it'll show you, so if I click on this and I hover over this, if I just leave the mouse there for a moment, it should show me. Maybe it doesn't do it there. It does it with the tools. Like if I hover over the tool, see how it says selection tool and then V? V is the keyboard shortcut to select this, to get the selection tool. I guess it doesn't do it for the keyframes. Let's go back to keyboard shortcuts. And I'm going to search for keyframe again. And then we're going to find right here. Oh, it's still, I guess it didn't. Oh, I didn't save this. No. Okay. It doesn't really matter. Okay. Keyframe. Okay. So there it is. So convert to keyframe is the thing that makes the new keyframe when we're making each block. And the default shortcut for that is F6. If you're on Windows, just hit F6. That's fine. If you're on Windows or Mac, and if you're on Mac and we need to change this because your keyboard probably doesn't do the function keys. If you're on Windows and you want to do it just to follow along, that's totally fine. What I'm going to do, fortunately for us, 6, just the number 6 is not used. And we can test that actually we can search by key command as well. So if I type in F6, you're going to see this convert to keyframes here. If I type in just 6, what we'll see is that there are some key commands that use 6, but most of them have modifier keys. It's not just the key 6. So what I can do with my convert to keyframes is I can actually add a keyframe and just hit 6. And it's hard to see after that, but if I click somewhere else, now you can see there's F6 and 6. There's 3 key commands that we're going to use a lot, and so I'm going to reassign all of them. One of them is F5. This is to insert a frame. So remember, we inserted just a frame before, not a keyframe. That's just the same information. That's F5. I'm going to add 5. Okay. Next is F7. And F7 is a blank keyframe. This is another one that we're going to use a lot, so I'm going to add 7. And so we use these a lot as we're animating. And having them just really easily accessible with our 5, 6, 7 keys is really nice. If that didn't make any sense, don't worry about it. Just use your mouse and it'll take a little bit longer. This is a slightly more efficient way to do things. Okay, so let's finish moving our box across the screen using our key commands. So now what I can do is if I hit 7, it'll make a blank keyframe and I could draw something else. Or if I hit 6, it'll make a new keyframe and I can just drag the box and that kind of continues what I'm doing. I can also hit 5 and that just adds a keyframe, but it's the same keyframe as this one. If I add that by mistake and I want to switch it, just hit 6 and now we can go. So I'm going to keep animating by hitting 6, 6, 6, 6. And this is frame by frame animation. So I'm just changing each frame a little bit at a time. And eventually, when I get this box off the screen, we'll have a little animation. And you can see it looks kind of like, you know, it's not perfectly smooth because I'm doing it with my hand. There's a little bit of variation between the frames. And so that gives us this kind of like wobbly motion. But, you know, if you hit enter, you'll see this playback. If you want to loop it, you can click the loop button here. The only problem is that you have to set the loop window. So this little blue arrow thing that comes up is your loop window. So if you set that to the whole thing, you can do that. And that's kind of useful if you're like working on a very specific part of the animation. A lot of times you'll be trying to like fix like one little thing. So you'll just like watch this little loop and then adjust your keyframes, which is another good thing to talk about. So if we look at this animation and we feel like, okay, there's this jump right here that's too far. Where is that? Maybe it's this one. Yeah, it's that one. I can just click on this keyframe, move this guy back, and that changes the keyframe. So I can edit, I can go back and wherever my playhead is, if I move this guy around, that will it'll just affect that keyframe in this style. Okay, so let's add a couple other things to make this a little more interesting. So let's, besides just animating the position of the box across the screen, let's also animate the rotation. So for this, I can use the free transform tool. So on the first frame, I can just deal with the just regular box, that's fine. Then I'll go to the next frame. Another thing that's really useful is to use the arrow keys, the little caret, greater than, less than symbols, or I'll just show you on the keyboard. These two guys, I'm just gonna zoom in right there. Those two guys, the two arrow keys, not the actual arrow keys, but the two little greater than less than signs. This is how I can navigate the timeline without directly clicking on the playhead. This is another thing where if you're using your keyboard and a pen to draw, it's a lot easier than having to go back to the mouse every time. Since we're already using the mouse, it doesn't make as big of a difference, but I tend to use those little less than greater than signs to move around. So let's move here, and I'm gonna just rotate a little bit. And then I'll go to the next one. So then here, I'm going to rotate a little bit more, but here I run into this issue. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and then I'm going to hold space to pan. Here I run into this issue where it was easy to move across the screen because I knew I was just moving a little bit more each time. But to get the rotation right, I need to be able to see the previous frame. So what I can do is turn on the onion skin. The onion skin is also a really important tool in animation. And what the onion skin does is it shows me a few frames before and a few frames after my animation. So I can see my current box here, and then I can see the rotation of the previous box. And so now when I rotate, I can just rotate it a little bit farther. And so that makes it so that I can animate a little easier. Okay, so let's go back to our box. Sometimes the onion skin has more information than you need or not enough. So let's go to our next box. So you can actually change the onion skin. Like if I don't want to see the frames going ahead, I can move this back and I'll only see the frames behind. If I want to see more or less frames, I can move this little blue line back. So maybe I want to see a few frames of rotation, I can move it back like that. If I hold down on this, I can also go to advanced settings, and you can actually change the colors of the frames coming after or before. Blue and green are kind of the default, but if you had a blue box, it would be hard to tell which was your current box. The pink is useful because it's not close to blue or green, but if we had a blue box, it'd be hard to see, so you could change that. Okay, so let's go to our next frame, or actually we need to rotate this one first. So I'm going to rotate this just a little bit farther than the previous one. And then I'm just going to repeat this action. Animating is a lot of repeating the same action over and over again. And if you want to double check your movement, or actually it doesn't show me, never mind, it doesn't show me a rotation over here. Okay, let's just keep going. Okay. This is actually going to be harder to get right than I was anticipating. Let's just go back and make sure. So yeah, a lot of animating is also just checking that you did it right. So that looks actually not so bad. And you know what? I'm not going to go all the way across. I'm just going to go. This is actually a pretty good, because it goes kind of from here to there. So that's pretty good, actually. Is that rotated? Yeah, it is rotated. Do I want to do a whole nother rotation? Maybe not. Maybe I'll just leave it how it is. So that's kind of nice. It kind of rotates into the scene and then slides across. Let's see. So that's actually not so bad for a starting point. I'm going to check my rundown again. So we talked about keyframes, talked about keyboard shortcuts, we talked about our onion skin. Okay, let's talk about how moving frames around is hard. And we can try to make a seamless animation. I'm going kind of from one side to the other, so maybe we'll do a different animation for that. We can add to it. That's fine. I'll make a new layer. Okay, let's talk about how moving frames around is hard. Sometimes when you click a frame and then you move the playhead, if I select a bunch of frames and then I like move them over here, it's gonna make like a blank frame right here. Another thing that will happen, if I select a bunch of frames and then I hit one of my key commands like 5 or 6, it's gonna do weird things to your animation. So it's hard to show examples of what not to do, and I'll keep that in mind and try to show them when we run into other issues. But basically what you want to watch out for is when you are animating, if you see that your keyframes are selected, you want to be careful about if any of these keyframes are highlighted blue and you didn't do it on purpose or whatever, you can just click outside and you won't, it'll stop being selected. So just keep an eye on that. It's hard to explain, but you'll run into issues where you like make a bunch of keyframes by mistake and you don't know why, and it's because you had some keyframes selected and then you added a keyframe. But I'll point it out if I do other mistakes like that. Okay, so this is a good start, but one thing I want to show when we're making an animated GIF is how to make a seamless animation. So when we're making an animated GIF, it's going to loop. And to make it look like it's looping back to the beginning, so we don't know where the beginning and end is, we have to do a little bit of planning. So one thing that I might do, I'm going to leave the box where it is, but I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to make another box, or I guess I have square and box. So let's make another box down here. And this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate it in a big circle. And so what I can do is I can hold on to this keyframe and I can copy the frame. So I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to go to paste. Okay, so now I have two copies of this keyframe. And so this is going to help me sort of animate towards this box. So I'm going to lock the bottom layer just so I can't even move it. And now I'm going to go through my frame. So I'm going to start here. And then if I hit 6, I'll be able to kind of move this box. Oh, here's a really good example of what not to do. So I hit 6 and it made all these things because I had this whole thing selected. I don't want to have this whole thing selected. I want to go to the next frame, hit 6, and then move it up like that. And then now the whole thing is selected. So these are the kind of issues that I'm talking about that you're going to run into. I don't know why it doesn't like that. Maybe if I just move this, no. So if I do that, it just makes all these extra frames. Okay, so if I move it and hit 6, then I can move this up like that. Oops. But now it's all selected. So honestly, I don't really know what the best way to deal with this is. I could just make these blank keyframes. Whoops. So I could hit 7. So now these are blank keyframes, but now I don't have the thing. So that's not really a good option either. So it's a little bit of a tricky one. Let me pause and see if I can come up with a good answer. Okay, so I don't know if this is the best way to do this, but I found that if I just hit the escape key, it deselects those frames, and then I can hit 6 and make my next frame. So this isn't the best workflow. There's probably better ways to do this, but I'm slowly making my way around towards the beginning of this, although I'm going a little bit too fast. So we might have to space out our keyframes a little bit. Let's see where this guy is. Okay, so if I hit escape and hit 6 and then move this guy down here. So let's see what I've got. Yeah, I'm moving a little too fast. So what I can do is insert some frames, and this is a good thing to go over. So if I go to this frame and I hit 5, that's going to insert a frame. I don't want to do it on the bottom layer. So what I want to do is click this one and insert a frame. Then I can go here and hit 6, and that'll become a keyframe. And then I can kind of move that in between these two guys. And so now I've got a little bit of extra data there. And let's just make this guy smaller. So I can click on this and then drag this back. And here, what we'll do is we'll just keep adding frames in until this matches the other one. Okay, so we've got an extra frame here, and let's add an extra frame here. So I'll hit 5 and then 6, and let's turn this guy off for a second because it's blocking my view. I'll add an extra frame right there. Now I'll go to the next one, 5, oops, 5, and 6. So yeah, you can see you have to get a workflow down. I think next I want to go here. So I'll hit 5 and 6 and move this like that, so maybe like that. And then here I'll hit 5 and 6 and move this guy in between. And let's do it here too. 5, 6, and go there. And then let's do one more. 5 and 6. Okay, so your takeaway from this is probably I don't want to do seamless animations. But now if we loop this whole thing, and let's turn off our onion skin. Now if we loop this whole thing, we'll have a nice little seamless animation. So this square is just going to keep rotating around, and we don't really know where it starts and stops. So that's what seamless means, is basically you don't know where the beginning and ending of an animation is. And so if we have something coming from the one side and going off the other, there's a clear beginning and ending. If we have something that's constantly looping around, we don't really know where the animation starts and stops. And so those are just a couple of styles of animation. Since they're combined here, it does kind of make it obvious which one is which, but this is just sort of an example. Okay, so I've covered a lot of things. It's probably a lot to throw at you guys. You will have to just kind of play around with it and get a workflow that works for you. But for now, let's export this animated GIF and post it on the Open Lab. So I'll go over that submission process real quick. And we're also going to submit this FLA file, the Animate file, on Brightspace. So I'll talk about that as well. So to export our project, we can go to File, and we can go to Export. And there's a few different options here. What we want to do for this one is animated GIF. Later, we'll do video. So I'm going to go to animated GIF, and that should bring up a little window, kind of like when we do it in Photoshop. There's a few options here. You're not going to really need to change anything. We can look at the GIF size. It's 42 kilobytes. Unless your animated GIF is like 10 megabytes or something like that, I wouldn't really worry about this. But you could make some changes if you want. You could, compress or do different things. But let's go ahead and save this. And it's just going to save as animated gif.gif. You can obviously change the name or call it whatever you like. And now we've got our files. We're ready to go over to the browser and submit this. So I'm going to go to Chrome, and let's make a new post. And we'll call this animated GIF. And for the category, we can choose animation, and we can choose weekly blog post. And then usually start with the animated GIF. If you want to type something first, that's fine. You can drag and drop here or use the image interface. I'm going to have to open my Finder and go to my animation folder, and there's my animated GIF. You can preview it here. And I'll just go ahead and drag it on there. And this is kind of like our first Photoshop assignment. Like, it doesn't have to be, a whole complex composition. It's just a way of getting us started, like using the tools and learning how to do some of the basics. So whatever your theme is or whatever you want to do for the animated GIF is perfectly fine. So we'll just write a quick description here. This animated GIF demonstrates frame by frame animation. Just a quick example. Obviously, I'm talking about like the demo. Feel free to talk about whatever it is your concept is for the animated GIF. It can be kind of like an abstract thing. Anything that you think would be interesting. If you're not sure, just we can email about it or talk about it in office hours if you want to think of some ideas together. But that's it. That's it for this post. So you can publish this, and then we're going to go over to Brightspace. I'm going to pause and bring up Brightspace because I don't have it up right now. Okay, so once you've published, you can copy this, and we're going to go over to Brightspace and just look for animated GIF blog post 5. And so just double check the rubric, but it's pretty much the same as what you're used to. So just make sure you've done everything there. go ahead and paste the link to your post on OpenLab, and then we can add our Flash file. So go to add a file, we're going to go to upload, we're going to go to MMP 100, animation, and use the .fla file. And don't use the recover one. That's like a backup. Once we close Animate, that'll disappear. So you don't want to upload that. That's just if you haven't saved yet. So I'm going to click open and click add. And then we're done with our submission. One quick note before we go. Sometimes when you make the animated GIF, let's view this post. I don't think it happened. No, okay, so you can see the animation. Sometimes depending on the size of the animation, WordPress does this thing, or an image file, WordPress does this thing where it makes extra copies of the image file to kind of optimize the image loading. So if you see that your animated GIF is like loading as a block, but it's not animating, there's a way to fix that. What you have to do is click on the image, scroll down, where it says aspect ratio, or no, where it says resolution, make sure it's full size. If it's medium, it's not going to be animating, because this is not the animated GIF. This is an image that WordPress generates for when you want to use the image in a medium format. But we want full size. If you have a especially big image, this is more likely to happen. If you have a smaller image, it probably won't. But if for any reason you see that your animated GIF is not animating when you post it, that's the first thing to look for. All right, so that's it for this video. Next week, what we'll do is look at tweens, which is a sort of automated way of doing animation. And then I also have like an optional video on symbols, because a lot of people want to do a slightly more complicated thing using symbols. It's not something that I think everybody will want to do, but there's always some people who ask about it. So I'm just going to do a quick video on that as well. And so we'll continue to work on the animation next week, and we'll do a slightly, start working on a slightly longer animation using the tween tools. Anyway, that's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next video.